Welcome everybody and good afternoon. Thank you for attending this webinar on quality of life in neuromuscular diseases organized by EURO-NMD in partnership with European Academy of Neurology and R&D for rare neurological diseases. This webinar is the result of a project led by EURO-NMD, a patient advisory board and patient representative involved in the education board of the network. Thank you to our today's speaker, Dr. Robert Pangalila, for taking the time to share his knowledge with us, and all the patients who share their testimony in this webinar. So a little presentation about Dr. Robert Pangalila. So he's a consultant in pediatric rehabilitation medicine at Rijndam Rehabilitation and at the Erasmus University Medical Center, both in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. His interests are neuromuscular diseases, traumatic brain injury, and cerebral palsy. In his current research work, he is involved in the creation of the Child Brain Lab in the Erasmus University Medical Center. For today's webinar, the talk has been recorded, but Dr. Robert Pangalila will participate in the Q&A at the end of this webinar. So do not hesitate to write your questions into the chat box. For your information, this webinar is recorded, and by participating in this webinar, you consent to this webinar and subsequent broadcast on EURO-NMD website on our YouTube channel. So thank you again, Dr. Pangalila, and I will launch the webinar.
Thank you for inviting me to give a short lecture on quality of life in neuromuscular disease. My name is Robert Pangalila. I'm a physiatrist and I work in Rotterdam, the Netherlands at the Erasmus University Medical Center and at Rijndam Rehabilitation Center. And I specialize in pediatric rehabilitation. And I think the reason that I was asked to give this webinar is that I did my PhD thesis a few years ago on quality of life of adults with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. The thesis was called Duchenne from the third decade, and I will use some examples of my study in this talk on quality of life. When looking at quality of life, it is very hard to do good research using quality of life because there are many problems with it. These are a few old sayings from the rehab specialist Wade in England from 2003, who said, you cannot measure quality of life because we don't know what it is. There's little agreement to the nature of the construct. And at the same time, it was said, when people do studies on quality of life in health literature, they most often don't really clarify what they mean with quality of life. And that is very important. So measuring quality of life, studying quality of life is difficult, but still it has many advantages. Because it is important to know how your patient is doing and feeling, and quality of life is an important patient-related outcome measure. Also, quality of life is an important determinant of compliance with therapy. And also, knowing about quality of life, or what the quality of life can be in the future, in pediatric rehabilitation can be very important to both parents and patients, because they will have a view of what life may look like later on. And maybe even more important, quality of life analysis may influence distribution of care and therapeutical choices. If, for instance, you have limited means and you must say, do I spend very much money on helping one patient with spinal muscular atrophy with very expensive medicine, or do I help a lot more patients, then quality of life becomes important in deciding these things. If you, for instance, say, well, I can do a heart transplant, I have one good heart, do I give it to a young patient with a heart or with a neuromuscular disease which has a poor quality of life, or do I give it to an older patient? Then quality of life can be an influencing factor in those decisions. So it's important to realize what the quality of life is and what the good and false assumptions may be. So to start somewhere, I think it is important to stick to the World Health Organization quality of life definition. And they say quality of life is an individual's perception of their position in life, note the individual, in the context of the culture and the value systems in which they live. Quality of life can be experienced different in a Western society than in a third world society, for instance, and in relations to their goals, expectations, standards, and concerns. So it is highly individual, and it is about how do I feel that I'm doing in the society that I'm living in. They also say, in explaining this definition, it is a broad-ranging concept, and it incorporates in a complex way, there you go again, individuals' physical health, psychological state, level of independence, social relationships, personal beliefs, and their relationship to salient features of the environment. Very important, it is subjective, it includes both positive and negative aspects, and it is multidimensional. Personally, I believe that quality of life has a lot to do with, can I set myself goals that are challenging but give me energy? I always say, at my age, if I want to be an Olympic marathon runner and that's my only goal, I will be very unhappy. If I have a goal in giving a nice lecture on quality of life, well, that is challenging, but it gives me energy. So that helps my quality of life. And so everybody can have his own vision of quality of life. And for instance, one of the most important contributing factors to quality of life is having a partner and a relationship. And most quality of life measurements don't take that into account. If you measure quality of life in relationship to health, you can measure quality of life on several levels, and it's important to know these levels. Beginning with the lower level, you can measure health status, and that is the person's own recording, but without evaluation, of how they are doing in physical, psychological, or social domains in relationship to their health. Very often the term health-related quality of life is used, and I believe that that is person's own perception of their functioning in physical, psychological, and social domains in relationship to health. So that means there is evaluation by the person himself, not saying this is how I do it, but this is how I feel about this aspect. And I think most important is general quality of life, and that is actually the WHO definition, a person's own perception of their position in life. And measuring on these three levels can give very different results, which I will show you with the examples from my own study. The Duchenne from the third decade study was in 80 participants who had a mean age of 28 years. And also we studied 80 parents, but I won't go into that. And these 80 patients, or 80 men with Duchenne, I must say, were all on ventilation. A quarter of them had had a tube. They were all wheelchair and one was bedridden. They were all very severely restricted in their manual abilities, and many of them had fatigue. 3/4 of them had pain, and a significant portion were anxious or depressed. So on the body function structure level, there were a lot of problems. And if you look at their participation, that wasn't so great either. If you look at it objectively, 60% of them still live with their parents at this age. But more important, most of them, by far most of them, had no partner, which was their main problem. And they were also very lowly employed. Now, how does it translate to quality of life measurement? We ask these patients on all three levels: health status with the SF36, health-related quality of life with the World Health Organization quality of life questionnaire, the BREF version, and on general quality of life with the one item, Huckel BREF item, which asks, how do you value your own quality of life? If you look at health status, and remember that these were all men with Duchenne in an advanced stage, so there were many problems there. They were aware that they had many problems on physical functioning and on things like vitality and health. So they were aware of their restrictions, but they said our mental health is quite good, normal, and we don't have that many emotional role limitations. That is that is stating how it was without valuation of that. If you look at the health-related quality of life, how did they value their functioning? Then, surprisingly, they said our physical health is the same as the reference population. Our psychological health is even a little bit better than the reference population. Our biggest problem is in social functioning, because there we are doing worse. And to give an example of that, I showed you that 3/4 of them had pain, and that was visible in the SF36 measurement. But in the problems which are shown in the Huckel BREF, pain was their least problem, and their biggest problem, which, as they valued it, was the lack of sexual partner and a relationship. And to get to the highest level, how do you value your quality of life in general? 3/4 of them said, I have a good or very good quality of life. So on the different levels, you see, they know they have limitations, but they value that very differently when you look at health-related quality of life or general quality of life. And here you see the disability paradox. And disability paradox is a term coined by Albrecht and de Vlieger long ago. And they describe this disability paradox as the fact that very severely disabled persons with serious limitations can experience a good quality of life, where that is counterintuitive to bystanders who don't know about their disease. And why is it possible to have a good quality of life when you are so severely limited? That is because quality of life is not static. A very important term in this respect is the response shift. People adapt to their new situation and change their norms and goals. In the normal course of life, your goals change. What is important for a 20-year-old, for instance, being able to go out and to have and to stay up late and party, that constitutes quality of life for them, whereas an 80-year-old may get his quality of life from completely different things. If you get a disease and you lose a lot of functioning at the beginning, your quality of life will deteriorate to a big deal, because you realize, for instance, well, I'm no longer able to sport like I used to, and that was important to me. But after a while, you realize that you can still be a good father, and that can be important, or that you can develop new goals which can give new meaning to your quality of life. I recently spoke to a lady who said what is very important for my quality of life is that I am able to ride my own car and thus be independent. And that can give quality of life. So quality of life is not static, but you adapt. And that is why people can experience a good quality of life even when their functioning has deteriorated to an important degree. And we know that not only in neuromuscular diseases, but also, for instance, in spinal cord injuries, where in most people quality of life gets to the previous level before people got a spinal cord injury after some time. So it is important to realize that quality of life is not static, and that you must take that into account when you read about quality of life. Also, when reading about quality of life, it is important to see who has evaluated quality of life. This is a picture from the study of Landveld et al. In people with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and they asked both the patients, their caregivers, and they looked at the utility assessments, which means that the scores of the patients are set against a norm of the normal population. And what you see here is the green boxes are the caregivers, the blue boxes are the patients themselves, the men with Duchenne or boys with Duchenne themselves, and the yellow boxes is the evaluation when it is set against the norm population. So people who are not knowledgeable with the disease itself. And you see that consistently the patients say that their quality of life is a little bit better than when assessed by the caregivers, and that the general population values quality of life significantly lower. So who evaluates is also a very important aspect when studying quality of life. Also, how you question quality of life is very important. The clearest is the difference between a single question and a questionnaire. If you ask a single question, how do you value quality of life, then the one responding to that can implicitly weigh all the things that are important for him, his family, his relationship, his work, leisure, all things that are salient to his quality of life are implicitly weighed in the answer when he says, I have a good quality of life or a bad quality of life. If you have questionnaires, then it is decided, quality of life is decided by what is put in that questionnaire by the ones who develop the questionnaire. And that can be very valuable, but also a lot of things that are important to the individual won't be measured in that questionnaire. You see the recently developed DMD quality of life questionnaire, where you see that physical functioning, psychological impact, and social participation are estimated by very specific problems, which may or may not be salient to the patient himself. And also, it is important to realize what measurement type you use. We have general measurements, which can be used in any disease, which are useful for assessing general quality of life in comparison with other health situations. But the problem is that they are relatively unresponsive to change, as I showed you, because of the response shift. Therefore, you have also disease-specific measures who can weigh things that are relevant to the specific disease much better, and thereby become more responsive to change over time or in response to an intervention. So if you develop an intervention and want to say, does that influence quality of life, then a disease-specific measure will be much more responsive than a general measure. And a completely different type of measurement is utility measurement, which is used to evaluate quality of life as a basic for economic evaluation or distributional issues. And there, health status is assessed in relation to norm scores by the general public, and not in the own perspective of the patient himself. And it translates to quality adjusted life years, for instance. And how is that done in general? One way is the time trade-off system, where people are given a certain health status. For instance, consider that you were blind and compare that to and completely perfect health, how many years would you of perfect health of how many years of life would you be prepared to trade to avoid the situation of being blind? And that is the way the general norms are created, and that gives completely different kind of evaluation than the person's own perspective or that of his caregiver. So what is very important to realize is that quality of life is not one concept, but quality of life is salient to the person himself, and it can mean very different things. And still it can be useful to measure quality of life, but if you assess quality of life by yourself, or if you read a study on quality of life, you must always ask yourself, why was quality of life assessed? Was that for economic reasons, or was that to see whether there was a difference in quality of life after an intervention, or is it to inform the public or patients about what quality of life can be? Completely different questions. Then it's important to ask yourself what concept of quality of life is being assessed. Is that general quality of life, or is that health-related quality of life, for instance? Because you'll get different outcomes depending on the concept. It is important to ask who was asked to assess quality of life, and it is important to ask what kind of measurement was used. Was that a single question or a questionnaire? Was that a general questionnaire, or was that a disease-specific measurement, or was it a utility measurement? Because all these different aspects have to be in accordance with each other and the goal why you measure quality of life. So quality of life measurement is quite interesting. It is important, but you must do it well, and you must realize that quality of life as doctors mean quality of life is completely different than what the general public may say or what the person who is involved may say. So I hope that will give some things to think about when you are looking into quality of life. And I thank you for your attention.
For me, quality of life is not only measured in my own health and well-being, but it's also about how I see myself in society. So self-esteem and confidence is extremely important for quality of life, but it's hard to have that when you are unable to achieve the same things as others. So what that means is it's important for me to be at work, to have a relationship, to have a home. For some people, it's important to have a family as well. And I think having those things is really important for quality of life, just because then you feel like you're at the same level as other people and you're participating in society in the same way. I think in terms of my health and my condition, um, it's it's not directly related to achieving any of those things, but it can be indirectly related because it makes it a bit harder to achieve these things. But if you have the right care and the right support and the right equipment and facilities, then you can achieve all of these things, as I have. And as a result, my quality of life is very high. So I don't think it's really easy to separate health related quality of life to the other aspects of quality of life because it's all interrelated. You know, health can make it harder to achieve certain things. For example, it can make it harder to work, but also, you know, being in work and feeling valued can have a big impact on your health. So it works both ways, I think. My condition means I am dependent on others for my personal care, and I think the quality and consistency of this care has a massive bearing on my quality of life. If I have caregivers who understand me and can support me in the way that I need it, then that can just make my life so much easier. I don't have to worry about things, and you know, it just makes it easier for me to use all of my equipment and everything that I need. So that's really important for my quality of life. I think another thing that's important is to be in control of my own time. So, for example, if you have carers from an agency coming in and providing care at certain times, you have to go to bed, you have to get up at a set time. That's quite disempowering, and that does impact on your quality of life if you're being required to do things that you don't want to do. I think also, you need to be in control of your own time in terms of things like health and hospital appointments. If someone else is making these for you, it makes it harder to do things like work and enjoy your leisure time because someone else is telling you you must go to the hospital at this time. So that can be quite difficult for quality of life. So yeah, I think that's probably one of the most important things is to have choice over what I do and when I do it. And I choose to use my time to work. And I think working for me is vital to my quality of life as it allows me to feel that my life has value and meaning. But it doesn't necessarily mean that work is the same, has the same value for everyone. And I think sometimes, um, if you're working and you have like a lot of exhaustion and fatigue or pain, then I think working in that case can actually make your quality of life lower. So I think again it comes down to it all being interrelated with health, but it's not just about health, it's about much more than that. I think my relationship, so I'm married, and I think my relationship has a very significant bearing on my quality of life. I think being lonely and single, which I was for quite a few years, I found that very difficult, and it was a constant thought in my mind. And I think even though you can have a good life without a relationship as a single person, I think something I always came back to was feeling like I was missing something before I had my relationship. So I think having the room and space to develop relationships is really vital to quality of life. And I think that in itself requires lots of other things. It requires, independent living. It requires the control over your own time. It requires the right kind of care support and, personalized care. And yeah, just having your own space, basically. So I think there's a lot of things that need to happen for me to have the high quality of life that I do. So yeah, I'm very happy with my quality of life. I have a PhD, I have a job, I have a husband, I have pets, I have my own home. These are all really important and far more important than the progression of my Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And I think my condition has got a lot worse over the last 10 years, but my quality of life has increased and improved very significantly over those 10 years. So it just goes to show that the connection is not so direct.
My name is Madelon Groneman. I'm a 59-year-old woman living with myofibrillar myopathy, and I am a full-time wheelchair user. For me, quality of life is directly related to independency. For me, it's important to be able to decide myself when to perform activities or go out of the house. I live in a small rural village without accessible public transportation. So for me, it is a very important aspect for my quality of life to be able to drive my car. This enables me to go to work, visit friends, and go to healthcare appointments, for instance, without the hassle of having to arrange accessible taxis. As long as I can drive my car, I don't feel disabled. Interestingly, within a healthcare setting, nobody expects me to drive a car. This has already several times resulted in the prescription of medicines that have an impact on driving. Mostly I found out only when I picked up the medicine at the pharmacy. That's why I would like to stress that healthcare providers ask patients what is important to them for their quality of life and take that into account when prescribing medicines or treatments. Be aware that quality of life for patients may be something different from managing the disease effectively.
Hello, I'm Laetitia. I'm from France, and I have a disease, SMA, spinal muscular amyotrophy, and I'm here to talk about the medical quality of life and the patient quality of life, because it's two different things. Most people think it's the same, but it's not the same. The medical quality of life is focused on medical parameter, and the doctors only look on this parameter, like the pain, the fatigue, or the physiotherapist scale. And all these parameters don't represent the daily life, because the daily life is not a physiotherapist exercise, is a task that everyone do, like brushing the teeth, or brushing our hair, or drink. So when a patient talk about his quality of life, is always think about is a task that they have to do during the day. And for example, it's not the same also for patient and the parents of this patient. I have a personal example because I am in a clinical trial, and in this trial I have to fill a test about the task I do in daily life, and how much I need helping for this task. For example, to transfer from the bed to a chair, do I need a little help, totally help, or can I do it alone? And for all these tasks, from brushing teeth, move a book, use a computer, my father fills the same test, and he always puts that I need more help than that I put in the questionnaire. It's because I think I have the impression I can do more than my father, who is a help person. But at the end of this questionnaire, there is a general question about a note for the daily life. Just putting a note between 0 to 100 about how I feel every day. And my father always put a higher note than me. So my father thinks I need more help, but I'm in a better mood than me. So it's an example that quality of life is very depending on the person who fills the questionnaire. And there is another depending of quality of life in SMA, because SMA is disease is a children disease. So there is parents of patients, and now there is adults who are patients. And when you ask the quality of life the parents want for their children, they always want something like a normal life. So for parents, it's very important that their children can walk, and or can swim, or can have a job, and they don't imagine this life with a wheelchair. And for an adult with 40 years old, he is on a wheelchair from 2 years old, so many years. And an adult will more think about the task to realize in a daily life, and a big improve of the quality of life will be the capacity of transfer, like transfer from a bed to a chair, or from the wheelchair to the toilet, but this transfer is not associated with the capacity of walk. It's very depending, undepending, pardon, sorry. And quality of life for patient is really about the task of a daily. For me, it will be a very big improvement of my daily life if I can go alone without help, without a help carrier, because it will improve my quality of life even if I stay in a wheelchair. And if I lose the ability to talk because of respiratory issue, I think I will lose more about my quality of life, like than the medical quality of life will check it.
Hello, my name is Boriana Stoyanova, and I'm co-founder and board member of the National Association of Patients with Mitochondrial Diseases in Bulgaria. I want to share with you my personal experience, how a rare disease affects the quality of life of the patient's family, the challenges that we had, and the solutions to deal with those challenges. Our son was diagnosed with a very rare mitochondrial disease in 2014, and he's now 21 years old. His disease has seriously progressed since the time he was diagnosed, and he's using a wheelchair for the last 2.5 years, and he needs assistance for most of his daily activities. We also have a daughter, 15 years old now. Diagnosing of our son 8 years ago with a very rare disease, which currently has no cure, affected the quality of life of our family in several ways. First of all, the disease has a very serious emotional and psychological impact on all family members. Initially, we didn't know anything about mitochondrial diseases. The neurologists that we met in Bulgaria had very little experience with mito patients, and none of them has specialized in mitochondrial diseases. Uncertainty, fear, confusion, and even anger were only part of the emotions that hit us all. We're doing several things to manage the emotional and psychological stress. We met doctors in Europe who are specialized in mitochondrial diseases and started reading a lot of specialized literature, and now we know many things about the disease, the mito cocktail with vitamins, antioxidants, and other supplements that our son is taking, his nutritional regime and physiotherapy, his medical checks. We also follow very closely all the news in the field of mitochondrial medicine and clinical trials which are in progress, and this brings us hope. We had consultations with the psychologists as we needed to get professional advice how to manage the imbalances and negative feelings in order to support our son. Each of us has found a way to relax and recover from this stress through yoga, meditation, music, theater. Surprisingly, kids turn out to be much more emotionally wise in the new situation than I ever thought, and this is relevant both for our son and daughter. The second quality of life aspect that was affected by this daily activities. With my husband, we continued to work actively. Initially, we received help in caring for our son from his grandparents. However, since the start of COVID pandemic, the care for our son was completely taken over by me and my husband in order to limit the risk of infecting him with COVID. How are we handling the challenges in the daily activities? We combine home office with office business engagements. We have a plan for each week so that we can take care of our son and work at the same time. Sometimes we need to catch up in the evenings or during the weekends, but still we find a way to be both parents and professional. Our daughter is also very supportive to her brother, and although only 15, she is an extremely reliable person. The disease also affected our social life. Each of us had to change to a certain extent the professional engagements and networking events. Due to the pandemic, we limited a lot our social relations during the last 2 years, as the risk for our son was really very high. What is our approach to manage the impact on social life? When we go out to meet people or to travel for holiday, we plan very well and always consider how to arrange everything so that our son doesn't get too tired, gets his meals on time, has enough rest and sleep, as all these are critical factors for his health condition. We prefer inviting people at home and not going out, as this way we still have the opportunity to socialize, and at the same time, our son is not challenged with changes of his daily routine. Myself and our daughter became very active in volunteering, including in respect of the METO community and rare disease patients in Bulgaria. We encourage our daughter to keep active social life, as this is really important for a teenager like her. The disease also affected the family in a financial aspect, as mitochondrial diseases are not recognized in Bulgaria as rare disease, and we're paying ourselves for our son's mitococktail, physiotherapy, and so on. And in conclusion, I want to say that the disease of our son affected the quality of life of our family in many different ways. But regardless of that, we try to get the best of the situation. We're showing our son that we all have to keep on going, and I'm very proud that he finished high school and is now third-year student in journalism at Sofia University. We are motivated and inspired, and I'm very happy that we are co-founders of the Me Too Patients Association in Bulgaria, and we are trying to make a change in the rare disease environment in our country. We as a family are together and united, as this is the best way we can support our son. And as a result of our family journey in the last years, our daughter decided that she wants to become a doctor. Thank you for your time and for giving me the opportunity to share my personal experience.
My story as a neuromuscular patient started 5 years ago when I was diagnosed with CIDP. CIDP is a rare chronic neuromuscular condition, and it's included among the immune-mediated peripheral neuropathies, together with Guillain-Barré syndrome, multifocal motor neuropathies, Levy-Sumner syndrome, and their variants. It's an acquired condition. It means that we are not born with it, and it's a pathology of adults. Statistically, it occurs from the 4th, 5th decades onwards. Pediatric cases are very rare. Immune-mediated peripheral neuropathies may cause different levels of disabilities, from mild to severe, and they may require regular treatments. The first-line therapy is based on immunoglobulin, infused in a subcutaneous or intravenous way. Some of us are also treated with corticosteroids and or plasmapheresis, and some of us are bound to some kind of rehabilitation every now and then, depending on the disease course. Immune-mediated peripheral neuropathies may arise all of a sudden without any previous symptoms, and they change your life forever in just a matter of days, sometimes hours. It happens to me 5 years ago. I mean that in our life as a patient, there is somewhere a clear cut between from what we were before and what we are after the disease. Sometimes this clear cut is difficult to accept, and it may trigger lots of anxiety and discomfort. These aspects, of course, have less to do with the clinical symptoms of the disease, but they impact a great deal on our quality of life. As many others life-changing events, the condition really brings your coping abilities to its limit. Therefore, the quality of life for us has quite a lot to do with just acceptance, coping strategies, mental balance, anxiety control, issues that concern the individual perception And that seems rather difficult to be measured by a clinician on one side, but even difficult to be admitted by patients on the other side. Atypical symptoms whose impact is often underestimated by a clinician is fatigue. Many of us constantly experience exhaustion, which makes hard to tackle everyday routine. Apparently, it proves to be tricky to clinicians to rate fatigue with the tools they have. And some of them are not even trained to take this kind of symptoms into consideration. When I have my regular assessment, they measure out my muscular strength very carefully, but fatigue is something quite different than strength. It seems sitting somewhere in my mind, not just in my body. Therefore, I reckon we definitely need more specific, dedicated tools to assess quality of life in a more holistic way in order to keep into account a broader array of symptoms and even those individual perceptions that have been neglected so far. If I could quote psychologist Oron Antonovsky, I would say that quality of life has a lot to do with the sense of coherence. It depends, of course, on how you feel, physically, I mean, but it depends even on how understandable, manageable, meaningful is what is happening to you and to the social environment you live in. A patient quality of life is also the result of an interaction with significant others around the patient, at home, at work, in the community. I dare saying that quality of life is a little bit of a social issue that has to be tackled collectively with a multidisciplinary approach. I hope that by working together with clinicians, we may reach a deeper knowledge of what quality of life really is for each patient, so we can learn from each other how to improve it.
So thank you very much for this record, Dr. Robert Pangalila. I don't know if someone have a question. You can raise your hand and I can unmute you. Okay, so there is no question. Maybe you have a word for the end, Dr. Robert Pangalila, if you want to say something.
Well, I would like to thank all the other participants who made the video, because I think many aspects which I tried to bring across were very well explained by them. Jan saying, I have a good quality of life because I have a good social life, I'm married, I have work, even if my disease is going worse. Because that very much illustrates that quality of life. It's not about how your disease is necessarily. Of course, if your disease is unstable and you're getting worse, then you will have a bad quality of life, but that may get back to another level. And also Patricia very well mentioned Antonovsky in the sense of coherence, which is a very good philosophical view on quality of life and on balance and happiness in general. And what she said is that coping is very important. And I would like to stress that also. And also as a pediatric rehabilitation physician, I know, or we all know, that active coping is leads to a better quality of life and more self-esteem than passive coping. And as doctors and also sometimes as parents, we are very much inclined to protect children because they already have a disease, and sometimes overprotect them a bit, and that leads to more passive coping, and in the end that will probably lead to a lower quality of life, or at least a lower self-esteem. There are many studies showing that active coping leads to better quality of life. And if a child has a disease from the beginning, the people around him, his parents mostly, of course, but also teachers, doctors, can help him to make mistakes and to sometimes fall. It's not that bad and things like that. So he will also have problems to tackle and learn to do it by himself.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this talk, for your time, for your knowledge, and maybe another time, another webinar. You have something to say, François?
Yeah, just to comment, but Robert said already everything. We wanted to show as a patient through this webinar that, well, with my words, there are two types of quality of life measurements. There is the technical or the scientific one, which have some scales and some measurements. And you have the sensitive, the personal, the subjective quality of life, which is held by the patient, which is to us very important, most important. And that the idea also of this webinar was to show that this cannot be measured. It's very different from one to another. So for Madeleine, it's important to drive her car. Another is to be able to bring their children to school, or well, they have all different really perception of what we call quality of life. And I would just wanted to stress the importance of the dialogue between the clinician who can see regularly the patient, and there should be a real dialogue between themselves to choose the best solution to cope with the disease, so to give the proper care, but not to impair too much or even to improve their quality of life or what they perceive as a quality of life. And this only the patient can tell. So this dialogue maybe takes time, and also the long relationship with the clinician is important. If you see the same clinician over several years regularly, once or twice per year, you have this relationship which can also really improve the quality of life. So the importance of having a long-term relationship with a clinician is important as well. And yeah, and I wanted to thank Robert and all the participants to the webinar to share their experience and their expertise in the case of Robert. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much to you all.
I think there was something in the chat.
Yes, it's just someone who say thank you for sharing, and he have a lot of respect for the speakers and that they will share their experiences. So that's it. So thank you very much again for this webinar, and see you in the next webinar.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Elizabeth. Bye-bye.
Bye.